Okay, hi everyone. Um, I guess Helen said we could start. So if everyone is here, can I have Abdul and Joel check their sound, please? You guys can say hi or something.
Hello, mine is working.
Okay,
Yes.
cool.
Hey, you guys hear me all? Okay, good.
Okay, great. So uh I'll start out. I am Adele Frugundana, and I am the moderator of tonight's debate. I work in Rwanda as the international and virtual debates coordinator. It's nice to see you guys all again, and I'm so excited for today's debate. So I would like to start say that we are live on our YouTube channel. So if on your side you have people that would like to watch this debate, they can go on our YouTube channel, I Debate Rwanda. It's live. Also, I'm so excited for this debate, and thank you so much for everyone that made it on the Zoom, there at the university, and also on YouTube. I guess we could have Helen have some opening remarks, and then we can start with the debaters introducing themselves and their team. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. Thank you so much. It is definitely our immense pleasure to collaborate with Rwanda on this public debate. My name is Helen Morgan Permet. I am the Director of Debate at the Lawrence Debate Union. It's been a real pleasure, I think, to see our students work together on this topic and really bring very different perspectives. And so I just want to, thank the folks at Rwanda for working with us and collaborating. And I know, Adele, you're going to introduce the topic, I think. And so mostly I just want to say thank you. And I'm really looking forward to the debate.
Thank you so much. We're so excited as well. So I'll start with the topic. The topic is, should the federal government pay reparations to the descendants of slaves? That's the topic for today. And can I please have each debater introduce themselves and their team? If you guys have team names or if you just want to introduce yourselves, you can do that. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Julian. Julian Henry. I'll be the first speaker for the affirmative side.
I guess we'll all do off first. Hi, my name is Joel. I have 4 names as you'll see, but I guess you can call me Joel. I go by him, and I'll be the second speaker on side affirmative.
Hi, everyone. My name is Audrey Katera, and I'll be the third speaker on the affirmative side.
Hello, everybody. My name is Abdul Karim Mudisha, and I'll be the first speaker on the opposition side.
And I'm Rachel. I'll be the second speaker on the negative side.
I'm Owen. I'm the third speaker on the negative side.
Thank you, guys, and nice to meet you all. So I guess we can start the debate now. Everyone knows the format, but I'll go through the format before we start. So each speaker has 6 minutes, and then there's going to be a cross-X between each speech of 2 minutes. And we're going to start with the first speaker from the proposition side, affirmative side. Thank you.
All righty. Is everybody ready? Can everybody hear me?
Yes, but before you start, are you gonna time yourself or you want me to time you? Do you guys want me to time you? That can work. I can time everyone.
I can time myself if that's all right.
Okay, cool. No problem.
Okay.
You have a much bigger job.
All right. Alrighty. I'm gonna begin my speech in 3, 2, 1. In the establishment of the transatlantic trade, 12.5 million Africans were forcibly removed from their homes and forced onto boats to take them across the ocean. The 10.7 million that survived this harrowing journey found themselves stripped of all human rights and sold as chattel to the highest bidder, where they were forced into unpaid labor for the rest of their lives. Oppression has taken many forms over the course of human history, but it has always existed against enslaved people and their descendants. Today, we can see the effects that this historical oppression has caused. According to American Progress, in the US, the median income for the white household is $189,000, while for Black households, that number is $24,100. This metric is not just a result of the achievement gap that exists. The average wealth of a college-educated white household is $1,793,000, while for Black college-educated households, it's only $270,000. This means that even at equally high education levels, white people earn greater than 6 times more than Black people. This economic disparity holds the world back from ending oppression. In the words of Clyde Ross, an African-American who lived in the west side of Chicago, the problem was money. Without the money, you can't move. You can't educate your kids. You can't give them the right kind of food. You can't make the house look good. They think that this neighborhood is where they're supposed to be. It changes their outlook. My kids were going to the best schools in this neighborhood, and I couldn't keep them there. The large societal issues surrounding inequality will not go away on their own. Talking about the history of harm caused to slaves, Ta-Nehisi Coates writes, "It is as though we have run up a credit card bill and, having pledged to charge no more, remain befuddled that the balance does not disappear. The effects of that balance, interest accruing daily, are all around us. We must address this problem if we expect to build a more equal world. Therefore, the affirmative today believes that government should give reparations for slavery. We acknowledge that slavery has looked different in different places, so we will not suggest one model for reparations that needs to be used by all governments. Rather, we will show specific examples of how it might look in some governments and some common themes all reparations programs should have. In general, every government that continues today to feel the benefits of slavery should take part in a system of reparations. The goal of reparations is to repair harm done through slavery. We see these harms as being both financial and societal. Therefore, it is vital that these reparations are more than just financial payments. To define what all reparations plans should look like, we utilize the 3R model used by Rwanda following the genocide in 1994. The first R is remember. This means that governments would bolster the education they provide to citizens to honestly discuss the harms they've inflicted in the past. Additionally, this means the dismantling of education that teaches a one-sided version of history. For example, in Belgium, the Royal Museum of Central Africa has goods stolen from the Congo during a mass genocide led by their own King Leopold. A reparations program in Belgium would include the returning of these goods and expressly acknowledging the harms that King Leopold did in the Congo. The next R is rebuild. This is where governments would provide those affected by slavery with financial compensation. This could look like individual payments to people who can trace their ancestry back to slavery, but in other circumstances, it could look like the forgiveness of debts based on events that occurred during a time of enslavement. For example, the government of Haiti is still paying debts to France for political officials that were killed during the slave revolt. Part of France's reparations would be the forgiveness of these debts and clearly expressing that the reasons for this is because of reparations. The third R is reunite. As I talked about at the beginning of the speech, the harms of slavery are very much still present today. Governments formally acknowledging the harm that they've done in the past and making an attempt to financially repair those harms will allow people that are affected by slavery to truly become a part of wherever they are. There are 3 main reasons why we support reparations. First, the effects of slavery and continued oppression are still present today and have direct financial impacts on the present. The inequality we see today did not come out of thin air. It is from the effects of slavery that have trickled down to today. Slaves should have been paid for their work, and they were not. Yes, it would have been easier and more impactful to give reparations right when slavery was made illegal, but that did not happen. Governments should still give reparations today because the effects of slavery live on to today's society. Our second argument is that financially compensating those who have been historically oppressed will lead to a more just political system. It is no secret that money is power, especially when it comes to the politics of a country. Boosting up those who have been oppressed throughout history and are being oppressed in the status quo will enable greater political action that supports their causes. Someone who receives this payment can play a part in funding grassroots movements that they believe in, supporting more social programs that specifically help historically overlooked demographics, and they can make contributions to political groups that they believe have the same ideologies they do. The negative may have you believe that this money will always be misused and stolen from people, but we want to encourage you to see a different possibility. We want you to see that for some, this payment will mean that no longer having to worry about putting food on the table. For some, this will mean they no longer need to live in the fear of living paycheck to paycheck. And for some, this will finally be what they need to begin accumulating generational wealth. Our third argument is that acknowledgement of past wrongdoing can be beneficial for making progress forward. A government that hides it in its past and doesn't educate about its people on what it has done in the past is doomed to make the same mistakes in the future. The impact of a government formally acknowledging that they have participated in the inhumane practice of slavery, that the impacts of this slavery live on to today, and that they believe in compensating people for this harm cannot be understated. National conversations of equality will no longer start with the question of why is there inequality, but instead, how do we fix this inequality? Slavery exploited the labor of human beings for no return. It is long past the time that governments who benefited from this practice begin paying back that debt. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Julian. Now we're gonna have the cross-ex for 2 minutes.
And can everyone hear me asking Julian questions?
Yes.
Could you guys hear Rachel talking before?
I do not hear Rachel's question.
Okay. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, now we can hear it.
Okay, thank you guys. Okay, so I'll start my time in 3, 2, 1. You talked about governments acknowledging and repaying for the harms of slavery. Can you explain how this doesn't look like them wiping their hands of all responsibility and never worrying about it again?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a misconception of reparations. Like, yes, the financial payments are a big part of it, but we also think that this re-education of a nation and a government formally acknowledging the harm that they've done in the past, which many governments haven't done right now, will be so impactful to watch that out.
Can you explain to me why that is impactful if governments are the bad actors that usually do the oppression?
Absolutely. I think that's really like a fundamental question of like, how do we move forward from the harm that's happened in the past? And right now, governments haven't acknowledged like the stuff that's happening in the world right now is directly caused by slavery. Like the inequality that we see in the world is caused by that.
So what is going to be the tangible change that comes from governments acknowledging they caused harm in the descendants of slaves' lives?
Yeah, and part of that is tangible and a part of it is intangible, right? A government acknowledging it is important. The tangible gains will be, like I talked about, conversations won't start from like, why is this inequality happening? Like, oh, what is happening? It'll start with like, okay, what do we do to fix this inequality? Additionally, the financial payments that are giving out to people absolutely have tangible gains for them. People will begin being able to form generational wealth, which we think is important.
Can you explain how they're going to have that generational wealth come about from reparations?
Yeah, absolutely. So let's say you are a descendant of a slave. And so you can trace your ancestry back to that. We think that receiving maybe $100,000 in the mail, that's going to be totally beneficial for you. Maybe you can start that business that you've been dreaming of but never had the money to. Maybe you can start contributing to like political grassroots movements that you think are important.
So why is that going to go to contributing to grassroots movements and making generational wealth rather than putting food on the table and immediate things that these people need?
Yeah, and so it depends on what your family situation is, right? Like some people aren't going to be able to like open a business with this money. Some people are going to need to pay for their food and stuff. And we think that's also super important and that's a benefit those people will get. But we believe that like a certain section at least will have enough stability that they can start planning these businesses or building generational wealth, which we think is important. But even those people who can't will now not be living paycheck to paycheck and will have more food on the table, which we also see as a benefit.
Okay, on a different line. Do you agree that companies understand the buying power of the Black population?
Yeah, yeah.
Can you explain why these companies will not extort the increased capital that the Black population has out of them when they receive reparations?
Yeah, so my answer to part of that is sort of like twofold. One, we think that that's not going to happen in all cases, right? Like assuming that like all Black people are going to lose all of this money to corporations is incorrect. Many people will be able to resist that and will be able to, you know, keep the money and do what they want with it. Even in the cases where like this corporation is unfairly extorting people, I think like advertising exists in the status quo and already takes advantage of people. Like that's a harm that neither side can completely get rid of. What our side does is actually like gives money to people for what they should be given money for, which we think is important.
Cool. And that's time.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Rachel and Julian. Now we're gonna have the first speaker from the opposition side. Thank you.
Starting my speech. Put a timer. Okay. In 1860, slaves as an asset were worth more than all of America's manufacturing, all of the railroads, all of the productive capacity of the United States put together. Yale historian David Blight noted, slaves were the single largest by far financial asset of property in the entire American economy. The sale of these slaves, in whose bodies that money congealed, denied them their own humanity. The vending of the Black body and the sundering of the Black family became an economy unto itself. The historians I just quoted explain that the history of slavery around the globe is deeply intertwined with capitalism and anti-Blackness. These issues are structural and systemic, not individual. At best, the direct parallel to the affirmative side is proposing to the descendants of slaves via a reparations policy will lead to short-term financial benefits. We on the negative are not disputing that. But when one examines the long-term impacts of reparations policy, it falls short. Today, we need to focus on long-term impacts, not short-term benefits. Slavery lasted centuries, and the impacts of today is debating to be similarly far-reaching. Don't let the affirmative convince you that their policy will create generational wealth, widespread equality, or lead to an increase in agency of the people in the African diaspora. The affirmative policy addresses none of the systems that were specifically created to oppress the African diaspora, and therefore they allowed those harms to continue. The negative theme in this debate is focused on providing both short-term and long-term benefits. We shall present two arguments as to why reparations fail and why uplifting and funding social movements will lead to the best outcomes for descendants of the historically enslaved. The first argument is that the affirmative plan fails because it's rooted in this idea of capitalism, and there are three subpoints as to why this is harmful. The first point is on the violence inherent to colonialism. Colonialism left artificially drawn borders on historical tribal lands, leaving groups forced to live together who had no shared history whatsoever. One such example is how Nigeria was created. It forced together the Hausa and the Fulani, the Hausa Fulani, the Yoruba and the Igbo, and these people had no history of living together, which led to a war, the Biafran War, that lasted from 1967 to 1970, when the Igbo people tried to secede after being persecuted by the federal military government, which was led by groups from other tribes. The second subpoint is on the commodification of the Black body. The oppression of Black bodies is inherent to the functioning of the capitalist system. As long as this economic system is present, the oppression of the Black body will continue to occur. Reparations is essentially a liberal multicultural form of inclusion to value. In other words, it includes some Black bodies into a system that continues to operate through a racialized logic, and therefore it leaves racism intact and ensures new forms of inequities between Black people themselves. You cannot achieve social justice in a system that's inherently oppressive to an entire group of people. The commodification of the Black body was one of the problems with slavery. We cannot rectify that injustice by simply recommodifying the Black body. A repertory check or repertory policy ignores that capitalism operates to support white supremacy and anti-Blackness. Even if the money went to good use from the descendants of the slaves, as one of the elements of what they're suggesting is, it would be forcing them to play into their own oppression by supporting this very capitalist system. So how exactly does capitalism oppress Black people? Racial capitalists conquered the West. Racial capitalists waged the Civil War. Racial capitalists industrialized St. Louis and then deindustrialized it. And at all these steps, they're exploiting Black people just as brutally as slaveholders did. The third point on the first argument is on the reflexivity of capitalism. That means the reparations don't meaningfully improve Black lives. It will leave them as oppressed as they are under the status quo. I shall go on to briefly talk about the second argument. The second argument is direct compensation of descendants of slaves will disallow structural change to occur in the future, as opposed to what the affirmative side will have you believe. The state will write a check, then think that the problem is solved. Likely they'll never listen to any other claims from descendants of slavery again because they believe they have answered a radical call for reparations. Direct monetary compensation, which is key to their plan, gives a sort of moral license to not address the systems of oppression. The reparatory money will eventually run out, and the systems of oppression will still exist, basically negating any positive impact that they're promising. This matters because we need to save political capital. Reparations policies across the globe would take tremendous amounts of political capital. We have seen a commission to study and develop reparations proposal, the act for the commission to study and develop reparations proposals for African Americans, introduced in the House every session, each and every session since 1999, and being rejected every single time. For this policy to be passed, it would take all of the political capital any governing body has in any country. There are other initiatives that are equally important that will not get done, such as ending slavery now, protecting LGBT rights across the globe, and ensuring free and fair elections. Though the affirmative side promises us short-term benefits, we do not see a significant long-term benefit. Instead, we see long-term harm. As considering this, the opposition side should take the debate.
Thank you so much, Abdul. We're gonna have the cross-ex for 2 minutes.
Alrighty, Abdul, are you ready?
Yes.
Okay. I want to start with that quote, that statistic you brought up about slaves being worth so much of the US economy. Doesn't this statistic show that the US economy is built from slavery, and for that reason we should pay reparations for that financial gain that the US has because of slavery?
What it does show is that this whole system, the racially capitalist system, has always oppressed Black people, right? It used Black people for labor, right, for slavery, and it's still using them, oppressing them in the same way. And reparations for slavery, as you say, aren't enough. They'll just make the government or the US, clean its hands off of responsibility. Yet it's still oppressing the Black people in very many other ways.
Okay, yeah. So I want to talk next about sort of that argument you're talking about with lack of political will and sort of washing your hands. We believe that giving money to those who have been historically not been able to participate in governments as much will actually increase political will. Like you talked about HR 40, which is research about reparations, and we think that could get passed when you give money to those who are more invested in it. How will giving money to those who have been historically marginalized not increase political will?
I do not see how giving money to those who have been, it's just actually a way for, again, actually, like you said, it's a way to rid themselves of responsibility, right? If they're giving money directly to these people, they're like, we've done something about it, we can forget about it. And these systems of oppression that are still present can still go on, they're still sustained, which is what the opposition side is against, and the affirmative side is not addressing.
Okay, yeah, let's talk about those. So you talked about sort of getting rid of the systems of inequality before reparations make sense. We're trying to repair a harm that happened a long time ago, and your side is suggesting that we wait to remove all systems of inequality before we repair this harm. Why do you think that there's no urgency in repairing the harm and see these systems and how, since these systems of inequality were originally caused by slavery, why shouldn't we act now and try to repair that harm?
Because by seeming to act now to repair what happened in the past, it kind of covers the fact that while slavery was the beginning, there is still a form of oppression going on. It kind of makes it look like it's something that happened in the past, while it continues on to the present right now. It's just like it has transformed into different means, and it's still using Black people, still oppressing Black people, and giving reparations for slavery, as you know, the affirmative side is again advocating for, does not address the system.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Abdul and Julian. We're gonna go next to the second speaker from the proposition side.
Can you guys hear me? Yeah, okay. I guess I'll start. I time myself. Okay. Maybe the time and also have to see my time, so I'll time myself. 6 minutes. Okay. So I'm starting. Standing on an auction block in shades, an African man in good health could sell for over $1,200 in New Orleans. In the decade before the US Civil War, a girl of 9 or 10 could fetch $1,400 under the right market conditions. Pricing took into account a man's strength or a girl's ability to bear children for resale. Calculating the value of a life is complex, but as slavery has taught us, it has been done before. For centuries, Africans were reduced to property in North and South America and the Caribbean. Slave traders had no trouble pricing a human life. In abortion era economists repaid slave owners for the losses of their freed slaves. It is only when the descendants of these slaves return to ask for compensation for their lost ancestors that counting becomes difficult, or as side negative would have you think, rooted in capitalism. Ladies and gentlemen, I come to you with a few refutations. But first off, I'll talk a bit about what has been said since the big debate started. Now, I'll clearly remind you that our model for reparations actually has 3 parts, right? There's the remember part, there's the rebuild part, and there's the reunite part. Ladies and gentlemen, our first speaker explained how remember part includes education, and not just education, but making sure that there's museums and institutions that keep the memory of slavery so that cannot be repeated. And reunite includes formats or any forums or any single program that will make sure that these people who have been destroyed for very many years are reunited, ladies and gentlemen. And the rebuild part, which is the monetary part, is only one piece. So, ladies and gentlemen, since all the attacks simply predicate on this rebuilding part, therefore that means that they agree with both of our other models. So even if we were to consider that that's the bad idea, the cash money, then they'd still be agreeing for reparations. Second thing, ladies and gentlemen, they talk about how colonialism has to do with the Nigeria as a country being formed by combining different tribes. Are they advocating for literal borders of African countries to be completely dismantled? Are they advocating for something as radical as capitalism, in not only in the US, but as the whole Western Hemisphere and the whole West to be abolished? Ladies and gentlemen, listen to what they're doing. They're saying that there's big issues like racism and capitalism that still exist and we can't do reparations before then. But that means they ask for dismantling of these systems in order for reparations. But somehow they did not give anything. What have they done for addressing capitalism right now? What have they done? What are the systemic issues, systemic problems that they're solving? How are they solving systemic oppression that's happening for African Americans? So if the implication is we have to wait for these problems to disappear and they're not doing anything about it, what's the implication? They do not want African Americans to be liberated from these institutions. Ladies and gentlemen, we do not side with people who are against the development and liberation of Black people around the globe, and not just Black people. People have been enslaved for many years under the institution of slavery. Ladies and gentlemen, second thing is that it is not mutually exclusive. Even if we were to concede that capitalism is at odds with reparations and we can't do it before, that doesn't mean that we can't give reparations after. We simply wait for capitalism to be dismantled, how unrealistic that is, and therefore impose reparations, give people, because even without a system like capitalism, you still need money and you still need the transfer of money and liquidity. So ladies and gentlemen, their plan of waiting until the dismantling of capitalism or whatever they want is not exclusive to ours. Ladies and gentlemen, we can still do reparations under this model. Also, they talked about marketing. Let's look into the nitty-gritty. Why should we do it right now? Marketing, about how marketing exists, and that's a big problem. There are different ways to redress this. For example, we could say that instead of giving people liquidity, we could give the lower interest rates for African Americans for housing, since housing is a big issue. Ladies and gentlemen, there's very many ways you can address this problem. The only way they're giving is apathy and the lack of way. Ladies and gentlemen, that is not something we're prepared to side with. Also, ladies and gentlemen, they're talking about how there's precedents, right? The issue of political capital. Well, bad faith actors exist everywhere. If you saw a homeless person and you're willing to make a homeless shelter, you should not wait for the government to make systemic issues and systemic solutions towards addressing the homing issue. You should first make a homing shelter for the homeless people who are there dependent on the scraps that people give them, if they even get any scraps from the things they beg for. And homeless shelter is not a bad idea just because it doesn't address the root of the problem. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a problem for the temporary people in the case where there's still the institution of slavery, and yes, capitalism that still enslaves people. But then, ladies and gentlemen, that is not a good enough reason to reject reparations and this way to redress them. Ladies and gentlemen, there's also the fact that they keep talking about HR 40, which has like recently passed, and that so they're talking about how there's like Congress bills for reparations being like not passing. That's what we want to do. And more importantly, in 2019, HR 40, which is a congressional bill to revise the slavery and make proposition, was passed. That means there is progress. So as much as they'd like to disillusion you that there is no progress and we can't do reparations before there's progress, there's actually progress that's happening. And this is happening, and therefore plan proposition inside affirmatives, please for slavery reparations to take place is definitely valid and should be done. Ladies and gentlemen, I'll give you an analogy of two races. You have two races that have been racing for a long time. Now, one race has been going ahead because one has been held back for a long time by systemic racism and all those issues. Now, recently we've been there's been upheavals and cries for people to stop, for systemic solutions to begin, and they've started. But there's still a huge chasm, a chasm that has manifested due to centuries worth of oppression of this second person. Ladies and gentlemen, it's not enough to stop this racism and all these systemic issues that oppress this person. It's also needed that we have to bridge the gap between these two people because the other has been wrong. And this person only got ahead because they oppressed this other person. Ladies and gentlemen, we believe that we gave you enough argument. I think that's my time. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you so much, Joel. We're gonna have the cross-examination for, yes, we're gonna have the cross-ex now for 2.
Can everyone hear me?
I can.
Okay. Okay, let's get at my turn. Actually. Okay, starting cross-ex in 3, 2, 1. So, what are you aiming to solve by doing reparations here?
Yeah, we're aiming to do two things. Number one, we believe that the Black body, and not just the Black body, but different bodies around the world that have been enslaved, have been exploited, and we want to redress those issues. They've been exploited without caring about them. We also think that their culture has been taken, for example, in the Congo, where artifacts have been stolen from them and they've been enslaved for centuries. So not only do we want to give them back what's owed to them, but we also want to make sure that their culture is also preserved.
Okay. So you talk about education in your speech. How does this education take place?
Well, again, we do not give a specific model because there's definitely a lot of education that needs to happen and a lot of institutions needs to grow in order for it to happen. It's not a one-size-fits-all, but certain things like critical race theory, which has caused a lot of controversy, have to be implemented in certain places in the US. And also we think that education in, let's say, Africa has gaps missing. And we think that by having historians and museums that are erected and understand the context of slavery and its impact on Africa, will have a better education.
Okay, so this is primarily taking place in schools, correct?
I believe so, but it's also greater than school. We talk about museums. Museums are not just a school thing. It's also, anyone can go into a museum and learn about the history.
Okay, so then, okay, so why are you assuming that the state will be the right person to hand out these reparations?
Because the state has been the one to make legislation for centuries. Let's say in the US, the state has been the one to impose amendments that do not protect Black people who are supposed to be part of the free people. We believe the state has been the one to begin this oppression, so it should be the one to end it. And we believe there's incentive from there.
Okay, how will Black people not be made victims of corporate greed?
Again, we believe that there's different ways you can ensure that. For example, if you are assuming that maybe we're giving like a cash handout, that might be the case. How about if there's a housing crisis, which has been proven with Black people around in the US, then we can make the bank interest loans lower, right? That's a way to redress the issue, make sure they have access to an asset. And then there's, no exploitation from corporate. And there's different ways in which we can do that. Economists have a better way to do it. We're supporting bills like HR 40 that are making propositions which bear in mind exploitation and capitalism. I think my time is up.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Joel and Owen. Now we're gonna have the second speaker from the opposition side.
Okay, can you guys hear me? Okay, perfect. All right, I will start in 3, 2, 1. The affirmative says that we cannot achieve Black liberation on the negative, but Black liberation looks like Black women's liberation, Black queer liberation, and the liberation of every unique Black identity that is in the diaspora. All of these initiatives require political capital to achieve, and we can more tactfully harness political capital when we do not pursue a sweeping policy of reparations, because you cannot address all of the intersections of the African diaspora in one policy. It is merely too much. And as we have seen, reparations by most people is considered a very, very progressive policy, and we understand that you are not going to get more than one opportunity to pass a policy of this scope. So we would rather see less widespread policies go into place where we can address all of the intersections of the African diaspora's identity and achieve the same gains that the affirmative sets out to achieve. So first of all, I'm going to start out with a little rebuttal and then move on to our case. First of all, I'd like to bring up, why are we trusting the government to solve for a problem they created? The affirmative's plan doesn't have any specific text about how they're going to implement reparations. So this leads us to assume that they're going to leave it up to every central government in every country to fix it. And one of the main points of their plan is addressing the education system. However, why are we trusting the government to fix the education system that they put into place and subjugated those people with? I don't think they are necessarily the right people to address this. And I don't think we can just assume there are going to be positive effects when this goes into place because of the actors who are enforcing it. So we simply don't think that that is going to play out in the way the affirmative says it will. And then on the question of people being able to resist corporations with their autonomy, like Julian and I brought up in the first cross-sex, realistically, most people don't think about capitalism from a critical lens. They just go about their business, buying the things they need and trying to do the right thing. This looks like buying from companies who seem to be supporting the right causes, and they're not thinking about how those same companies may be using prison labor and directly oppressing their own people, and thereby they're forced to participate in their own oppression merely by existing in the society we live in. So we think that the reflexivity of capitalism and the way companies see the Black body as transactional will make the reparations useless and will ultimately create a harm for those Black bodies, whereas we could be pursuing a policy that is not merely financial or not merely educational. And also, I'd like to highlight the fallacy of urgency that the affirmative brings up. Realistically, our reparations policy is not going to get passed quickly or handed out quickly. It is going to take a long time for each individual government to research how much we should give out for reparations and what exactly is going to go into that policy. And there is no direct pressure on that government. So I don't think we can say that these things are going to happen right now. So we have the same time frame as the affirmative team does. So let's get into our case and what we're proposing. So first of all, we are saying the affirmative fails, and ultimately reparations does not solve for the systemic harms that are caused by colonialism at large. One, these systems that we were talking about mainly look like the school to prison pipeline. They look like the use of prison labor by large companies like Walmart and Target, and those same companies using virtue signaling to say they support Black Lives Matter and they support the African diaspora while still contributing to their direct oppression. So we see that ultimately when you give reparations to the African diaspora, you are going to signal to those companies that the Black population has more buying power and they have more capital that they can spend. And those companies are going to take advantage of the fact that those individuals have more capital and ultimately put out more enticing ads or more products that are going to look like they benefit the consumer, but ultimately just lead to the profiteering of that company. We ultimately think that is bad because of the way that I talked about those companies participate in the oppression of the Black population. So when we give out financial capital, it is not going to end in positive gains for that population. population. And also to bring up the point that Abdul talked about in his first speech, we see that a main harm of like colonialism at large, when we don't just focus on slavery, was like harms to the land itself and the unjust redrawing of borders by settlers that caused a lot of harms to the native population. And when he brought up the example of the Biafran War, there was a lot of harms created in ethnic conflict that are not going to be able to be addressed by reparatory policies for slavery because it's simply like outside the scope. So we think rather those harms that are imparted on those people from colonialism should be addressed. And like I said in my rebuttal, we ultimately only have one chance to pass a policy for reparations or for anything of that nature because of how divisive it is in the status quo. And we think that if we are going to pass one policy, it has to address all of the harms that the land has taken from colonialism and all of the harms that the like African continent has had to face from those being in place. And moving on to why reparations can never solve because it is rooted in capitalism. The oppression of the Black body is inherent to the functioning of the capitalist system. And as long as this economic system is present, the oppression of the Black body will continue to occur because, like I told you, capitalism is reflexive and makes the Black body transactional. From an article titled Racial Capitalism in 2015 in the Journal of Ethnic Studies, like Abdul said in his first speech, racial capitalists conquered the West and racial capitalists waged the Civil War. They industrialized St. Louis and deindustrialized it, and has essentially had a hold on the Black population since the beginning of industrialization and even before. Reparations is essentially a liberal, multicultural form of inclusion to value. It doesn't actually give Black bodies the things they need and dismantle the systems that are oppressing them in the status quo. If you give a policy of reparations, it is not going to have any direct impact on individuals' day-to-day life. There may be short-term financial gains from being able to put food on the table, but for how long? Is it going to be for a year? Is it going to be for a week? Eventually, that is going to run out, and they are still going to have to live in a world where they are routinely pulled over by the police. They are in danger every time they step into a crowded space because of the racism that pervades the status quo. We need to address that racism and those systems before we ever benefit that group of people. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Rachel. Let's go on with the cross-ex.
Okay, once again, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, great, I'll go. I'll start my time in 3, 2, 1. Do you believe that the 2020 Black Lives Matter surge in advocacy for dismantling the systemic oppression, do you think that has driven up political capital for support?
No, I don't necessarily think like the increase in support for Black Lives Matter, especially from corporations, has led to like increased political capital for that same movement, because we don't see any like legislation actually being passed for their initiatives when there was like an increase in support for those groups.
So what you're saying is the fact that people in conversation started to realize the systemic issues that plague them means nothing. Like there's no increase in political capital at all.
Sorry, can you repeat that?
That basically means that every single person conversing and realizing the systemic issues that plague them, that means nothing for political capital.
No, I think what I was meaning with that point is more on that like political capital is so rare in the idea that people work together and pass like large policies that we only have so much and we cannot spend it on reparations.
Okay.
Reparations in the way you're proposing it does not cover enough. And political capital in terms of like companies using it, they are misusing signaling and addressing these like groups like Black Lives Matter for the wrong reasons.
Okay, so how do you calculate one chance? We have only one shot at this. Like, what's your rubric or metric for calculating one chance?
Right. So I think we only have one chance because if you look at the governments of today, if you look at the United States, it's incredibly divisive, incredibly divided. So in order to work together to create like this reparations policy, like we've seen HR 40 has never passed, it's been introduced every session. To get something like that to pass and something even more sweeping, it is going to like take so much work to get together.
Okay,
and
it's so much work, but
you're never going to get something like it.
It's so much work, but how is it only one chance?
Sorry?
It's so much work, but how is it one chance? Like,
right,
how do you
because
calculate
like
that in one chance?
Yeah, like I ultimately don't think that legislators are going to pass two massive policies that are going to cost so much money, going to take so much work to put forward, because ultimately we don't see that they care enough about that population to do it more than once. We've never seen them do it before. So I need to hear from you why they would do it more than once.
Okay, so how do you think capitalism will end? Like, what's the realistic way you think capitalism can end?
I don't necessarily think in this debate we can end capitalism, but I think it's important to see that if you are giving reparations financially, you are still contributing to the oppression of the Black body through capitalism. Like I told you with our examples of corporations and examples of systemic oppression, you need to dismantle those before you can address those harms of capitalism. Right, it'd be very hard to undo.
Point is, if you dismantle them, then what's to prevent us from passing reparations? Because it's not exclusive. Why is it exclusive to us?
Right. So I told you exactly why reparations is uniquely harmful, because when you're increasing that amount of capital that the Black populations have, corporations are eventually going to take advantage of that, and they are going to render reparations useless in and of themselves, because they are going to extort that capital out of the Black body. And then the governments at large who gave those reparations policies are going to have wiped their hands clean of the problem and never address any issues in the future.
Okay, last question. What do you say of Haiti, which still has to pay reparations to France, its colonial master?
Well, once again, I think the same criticisms of reparations as you've proposed them apply if we are doing that. I think there are other policies we can pursue that are outside the scope of this debate that can actually pursue those widespread changes like we were talking about in the beginning of our speech. We don't necessarily need to get today, but...
And what would that look like?
I don't necessarily know what that would look like, but I think the same criticisms, like I said, still apply to a policy of reparations. We told you there are problems with the policy of reparations in and of themselves, because one, how divisive the word reparations is. And that leads to the point that you will never be able to get it passed in a legislature. Two, there are harms to directly giving financial compensation to individuals for problems that are structural and systemic, because you're not going to dismantle those systems by giving compensation to individuals.
I think that's my time.
Cool. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you so much, Rachel. And now can we have the third speaker from the proposition side?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I'm starting my speech now. The 1619 charter slavery was justified by the theory of human evolution that implies that Black men and women are less human than their white counterparts. The 1887 Jim Crow era was justified by the separate but equal status for all, and the 1970 incarceration of Black people justified by the war on drugs. Throughout history of mankind, Black oppression has been preserved and manifested in differently, but all for the seed of the 16th century transatlantic slave trade. There is a necessity to put an end to the generational impact of slavery and finally provide equitable opportunities to all. Today, the affirmative side believes that the scars will still linger around if nothing is done. It is simply not too late, and I'm proud to affirm. Before I move on to rebuilding our case, a few refutations. Since the beginning of this debate, the negative side talked about how financial payments is a way for governments to get away with oppression. But at the end of it all, they underestimate the power of being wrong, especially for strong governments that have to pay for it. At the end of it all, we believe that these governments have been justifying their wrongdoing for long, and it will be costly for them to pay for it. So there is no need for them to get away with oppression just because it's now through financial payments. And the first speaker comes here to also talk about how these financial benefits are of short terms. We talked about how that is a small part of the reparation program that they are bringing to the table, but at the end of it all, what truly matters is what these reparations entail. For some, it will be just all about not worrying about putting food at the table, but above all, they will finally have what they need to begin accumulating generational wealth, or as their existence is now equally as important as justified and manifested through reparations and for more apology. They also bring to the table that there is still racial capitalism, and in a world that there is capitalism, there wouldn't be any coexistence with the reparations that we're bringing to the table. But racial oppression has been as a result of governments, letting the slavery impact be breached to the status quo and is at risk of being sustained. This makes the affirmative side believe that something is lacked and is still lacking, as governments didn't admit their wrongdoing, rather justify their oppression for years and years. So we believe that there is a strong and power behind providing a formal acknowledgement and an apology. The second speaker also comes here and talks about how governments, we are giving, the power to government to solve the problem they created. And that's the reason we're doing so, because the problem that is created was too big for the government to be the one that created it. And it's too big for the government to be the one that can solve it, because its consequences were widespread and can only be solved through a body that is large enough than the corporations they mentioned, than just individuals they also mentioned to the table. They also talked about how how the problem in a world of cooperation, that's and that's like we cannot really solve it because of the corporations are are entitled to capitalism. But does that remove the power of the government? Does that remove the power of the federal government? Because at the end of it all, the Jim Crow era, all these kinds of stages of operations, of oppressions to the Black body has existed and continue to exist in a capitalist world, but have all been manifested through one government. So at the end of the day, we believe that our 3R plan still stands, because it mends the wounds from an economy and a social angle. So remember, we talked about how we owe the promotion of the right content to the victims through acknowledging the truth about the pain of the slaves, about the lynchings. Can you hear me? Oh, sorry, about the lynchings and about the poor contentions. So we also bring to the table the rebuilding part, ladies and gentlemen. From the start of this debate, the negative side has underestimated financial compensation, talking about how it's just a way for governments to get away with their wrongdoing, or that it will create short-term impact. But according to the Ta-Nehisi Codes from 1953 to 1963, the reparations money from the federal government of the German funded about a third of the total investment in Israel's electrical system, tripling in the railways, rebuilding a nation faster. We believe that this is truly enough of evidence to show how financial compensation from different angles, from individual to national or state angles, it is still important. It is still something that can rebuild the nation. It's still something that can sustain a certain system for all. And we also talked about reunite with the different identities involved. We are able to make sure that everyone is able to fit in our plan, in our model. At the end of it all, it's all about from society to the victims and from the victims to the society. With such an interaction and a connection being mended, we're able to assure that the wounds from a financial and an emotional and a psychological angle are all mended. At the end of the day, there is a reason to provide a reparation model that not only addresses the economic harms, but also tends to the wounds that were left behind by slavery. And I'm proud to offer.
Thank you so much, Audrey. Let's go on to the cross-ex.
I don't really think a third.
I don't think there's cross-ex for third.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So we're gonna have the third speaker right away from the opposition side.
Can everyone hear me? Good. Okay. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. The negative wins this debate because we show how reparations is the most damaging part of the broader negative plan. One cannot question that there is a moral justification for reparations, but we oppose this when we show how reparations will lead only to a lack of communication and understanding, an inflammation of old power structures and divisions, and Black people being made victims of predatory capitalism while not making their lives better in the status quo. Instead, we argue that we should focus on proposals that can do more, such as ending slavery now, protecting democracy, and LGBT rights. My speech will be structured around attacking each leg of the affirmative plan, each of the 3 Rs, and then building on what my partners have already done. So, from the affirmative plan, we see they tell us that it's 3 Rs. We in fact say right out of the gate that it's only 2. The reunite leg of this plan is purely to make it seem more transformative than it really is, which I'll be getting onto later in my speech. However, let's talk about how reparations hinders education. As Rachel brought this up, in, I think, the last cross-X, right? So if you give reparations to a segment of the population, this will inevitably create a certain amount of resentment among the other members of this population, right? We already see in the status quo difficulties in education around issues of race, such as critical race theory. However, we think that by giving reparations, one makes this much worse, as it will create further resentment. It will perpetuate the narrative that Black communities don't pull themselves up by their bootstraps, that they are receiving handouts from the government, and that this is ultimately something that they don't deserve, that for something that's centuries old, wrong, that they've moved past it. Why can't Black people? This sort of thing. We think that a way to solve this better might be to actually have promote education and promote some cross-cultural understanding without doing reparations. We think reparations is a single biggest hindrance we can have to getting clear education. And we think that the education of non-Black people is the single biggest thing which will actually lead to the betterment of Black lives, because that way it will actually lead to people questioning the amount of police stops that occur, the amount of Black people who end up in prison, or how the education system wrongs Black populations. I'm now going to get on to what extension on Rachel's point about our Biafran example, to really spell out just why the reunite portion where they say that to make them feel a part of wherever they are is entirely infeasible with reparations, right? So how we see the affirmative plan playing out, right? All affirmative is trying to do is to drop a penny of a solution into a bucket of a problem, as they don't reshape countries, right? As a result of what happened they operate from the wrong place historically, as these atrocities that occur as a result of colonialism are tied not only to Black bodies, but to the land itself, right? So building on, right, talking about Nigeria. Nigeria was separated into a country of the Yoruba, the Hausa, the Fulani, and the Igbo, all bunched into one country. Right, Gov is claiming with these reparations, descendants of the historically enslaved become at least on equal footing. We think that at the point at which even today, ethnic tensions are occurring, in 2012, the indigenous people of Biafra separatist movement was founded, led by Dami Kanu. In 2021, tensions between this movement and the Nigerian government escalated into the violent border crisis, with the Biafran indigenous peoples movement declaring that the second Nigeria-Biafra war had begun, and that this time Biafra would win. We think that at the point at which reparations fails in Africa because it is rendered meaningless, failing to right the wrongs of European colonialism if they do not redraw borders. And if we're talking in the US context, we think reparations fails, as Rachel said in her speech. They do not improve the day-to-day experience of Black people. Failing to stop police stops, failing to stop how the education system continually wrongs Black populations. What does this mean? Ultimately, reparations are a piecemeal tangible solution that attempts to be a bold, transformative thing, while ending up not actually solving for any of the contexts in which it means to do so, right? So in our case, we tell you that reparations are something that we think that these solutions should be done from the bottom up. We think that governments should not be the ones that should be doing this, as taking this out of Western governments doing this is the only way to get true Black liberation. We think that if we don't do this, if we make it so governments have to do this, then we continue to perpetuate the European colonial capitalist system that led to the oppression of the historically enslaved in the first place. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Owen. We're gonna go on with the proposition, reply, speech, and opposition. Each team is having. Am I correct?
Well, I think we did cross-ex, like reply speech is known, I think.
Okay, cool. So I guess the debate is done now. Yeah? Okay. All right. All right. So if we have any people from the audience that have questions or anything they want to add on to the speeches from all the debaters, you're free to go. And if there are any questions that comes on the YouTube channel, I'm gonna read it out to the debaters. And yeah, so any questions, please let us know. Okay, I see there is a question in the
from one of our audience members. Okay, perfect. I think it's hard to avoid that in a reparatory setting because I think reparations probably does have to look like financial compensation because like all of the points that the affirmative brought up. But I think the only way you could avoid that is somehow like either regulating or altering the way that corporations work because they're the ones who are preying on like the excess capital that the Black population has. So they're the problem, not necessarily like the reparations being in terms of like financial means.
I see Helen. I see Helen in the chat, but what did you learn from this debate with regards to how debate about reparations and struggles over them vary globally? Oh, I could answer that. I'll have an answer. I thought it was interesting reading about all the different reparation plans that existed. I definitely thought of reparations as like giving money to people and like that's sort of it before the debate, and then you learn and there's a lot more to it. And additionally, it's not necessarily like a check written out like Joel was talking about, like decreasing loans, or even there's some plans in the US about like baby bonds that you get when you're born and stuff. So there are a bunch of different plans that are just super duper interesting and maybe would be better ways than just giving direct checks to people. So I definitely learned a lot about that, which I thought was interesting for this debate.
Joel, can you also answer this question?
It was interesting, this debate. Like, not only, I guess, maybe part of the research process, identifying different, like, events of slavery throughout history, and kind of also trying to wonder which ones to address, because, yeah, it's been an institution of humanity since the dawn of civilization. So it was interesting also kind of seeing which ones manifest in real life and which ones impact has trickled down generations. And also, I think it was interesting, yeah, considering like when we're researching and doing mock debates, also hearing the opposition and like its attack for the way in which capitalism and Black oppression, and not just Black oppression, racism and slavery are intertwined. It was really a nice and interesting, nuanced argument. And yeah, I learned from that a lot.
if I guess there are no more, Audrey wants to answer. You raised your hand.
Yeah, I'll also love to say that it was also interesting in a way that reparations, the affirmative side, we found out that there are various ways reparations are, can be given out in a way that it's not just about the money, it's about, providing a formal apology. And even though very many people may say that just saying sorry doesn't make, doesn't change a thing, I really think that it does a lot, especially when it comes from like a big body such as like a government and all that kind of stuff, admitting that you're wrong and making sure that you pave way for like, existence of a generation that lives in a world where like, they acknowledge their existence and all that kind of stuff. So formal apologies and, accompanied by, financial compensations. It can, as we said, it can vary in different ways, from like European countries to like Africans, it may be take form of like, removing the debts and from the federal government, like the Black people, like giving, individual financial compensation, all that kind of stuff, just to make sure that everybody, the generational impacts of slavery are just put to an end. Yeah.
One other thing, I was just reading again what I learned from the debate. I just wanted to throw in that it was really awesome to work with other debaters who I had never met before this. It was awesome to work with Audrey and Joel. It was definitely like our conversations were more interesting because of the different perspectives we had, and like so much of our plan had to, like the 3R model is from Rwanda and stuff like that. So I just want to say thank you. It was a really awesome experience getting to debate with everybody. And yeah, I think I learned a lot from that.
I guess if there are no more questions, I could go on. No more questions on your side. Is that Vermont? No more questions? Yeah. Okay, there are no questions on the YouTube channel as well. So all I want to say is I want to first thank our audience with the questions they had and the insights they had, and also thank all our debaters so much. Thank you so much for providing thought-provoking insights and arguments. It was quite a really interesting debate. It was my first time having such a motion, so it was really exciting for me to learn about this, because I didn't actually know about the slavery or anything on that in the US. So I want to thank Helen for making this happen. Everybody that took part in this debate, thank you so much. Thank you so much for giving us time and having this debate together. Hopefully next time we're going to be together either here or over there. So hopefully it's going to work. And then also I would like to thank the debaters from Vermont. Thank you guys for this time, for mixing the teams, having like, can you hear me? Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, cool. So it was really nice having this time our teams mixed up. It was really nice for my debaters, and as well as I guess it was exciting for you guys as well to learn about, our debaters and how they usually work. So thank you so much. And if anybody else wants to say something or share something, please, the floor is yours. All the screen is yours.
I'll just quickly unmute and say the feeling is definitely mutual. It was a true pleasure for us to get to collaborate and work together. And I feel like we learned so much in the process. And I know that we have more things that we're going to work on in the future. And I think that just is super exciting for us. So thank you so much for helping to put this together. And thanks to all of the debaters. I learned a lot from this debate as well. And was really, overall very impressed with all the the complexity of the arguments that I think do justice to this, challenging topic. So really great job to everybody. And thanks for your hard work.
Yes. Thank you so much. And don't forget to check our website. It's iDebate Rwanda everywhere on our socials, on YouTube. It's iDebate Rwanda. And for those that missed the debate, if you want to share the debate with them, you can let them know that it's on our YouTube channel, and I could also share the recording. Yeah, so thank you so much, guys, and have a good day, you guys, and back here, have a good evening. Thank you.